Walker, and I'm the executive director here at the museum. I have been executive director since 2014. I started out not expecting ever to be a director of a museum, and now I find myself here, so it's kind of one step at a time.
I'm Tracy Bates, and I was the executive director of the Brickstore Museum from starting in November of 2003 through December of 2010. It's really a gem, and it's at the physical center of the community. It's very visible as sort of this jewel on Main Street in Kennebunk.
Why do people have such a passion for the museum? The Kennebunks are a pretty special place. For the biggest repository of all things Kennebunk Port, Arundel, this is it. People connect with this particular museum in a very important way.
My name is Catherine Lorenz Hussey, and I am the volunteer registrar. To put it, it's like being a bookkeeper for the artifacts and the archival material. When an object comes in, I have to give it a number, and it goes in a book. And then I have to describe it, and you do it on a sheet like this. And then you put it where it needs to go, like in a box.
The volunteers are absolutely essential to what we do. I think that's true for all nonprofits, really. You couldn't possibly have paid staff to execute all the elements of your mission, just financially infeasible. So it's a given that our volunteers are absolutely critical to what we do.
I'm addicted. Is that a nice way of putting it? I've worked for every single director that has been here at the museum. It got to be, I felt a certain responsibility to the museum. And when I first came, I worked with Sandy Armentrout and Joyce Butler, and they really laid the foundation for what the museum is today. And I worked with them for so many years, I felt a commitment to continue the work until I can hand it over to somebody who I think is competent.
So when I started as an intern, I worked with Catherine Hussey a lot. She kind of taught me the ropes, not only about working with collections, but just generally museum work and how that kind of all ties together, and using collections to speak to the community, not just, here's the date kind of process of how things are made, but how you use those to talk to a larger audience.
Different artifacts affect you differently. I started working with the Costco collection, and I like working with that. The china and the glass, and I mean, it's amazing to see some of these pieces of lace. I mean, I think most of the things in the museum have interest to me. The newspapers. I can open one of those and spend a whole day just looking through them and reading the ads and little blurbs that are in them. So I can't pick anything out that I prefer over anything else.
The Jane Morgan exhibit, she's kind of a larger-than-life character who lives here in the Kennebunks, but it's the same theme that we want to go on, which is talking about people's personal lives, personal stories. Again, the kind of big flashy fashion that we haven't been able to exhibit here at the museum. It's pretty amazing to see the intricate work that goes into all of these gowns. They're kind of like art pieces themselves.
Well, the Jane Morgan exhibit is certainly different. Obviously, it's much more contemporary, set in the 1950s and the 1960s. But I still think it tells an interesting story all by itself. When you look at the clothes, her costumes, and the music of the time, and the photographs of the time, you get a very clear picture of what American society looked like in the 1950s and the 1960s, and it's markedly different from the way it looks today.
We really get a sense of not only her style, but sort of the change of it over time. Additionally, I just think it's cool that we've got this person who has such close ties to the local community, who also went on and did all these interesting things, both at sort of domestic locations within the United States as well as abroad. I just think that's cool.
It's just really interesting how, again, the focus changes. It's about history, art, and culture, but there are so many different things within that the museum brings to the community. And this Jane Morgan exhibit is just another example.
This is not a museum where we show dusty old grandma's attic things. We show live things and talk about them in today's terms and yesterday's terms and try to bridge them all together.
A lot of work goes into an exhibit. You talk about what you want to do, what collections you have that haven't been out, and you discuss it. Then you start doing research, then you start pulling things out, then you start planning it out in the galleries. It's a whole process that goes into it. Then you have to write the labels and hang everything up or put it in place. And it's a long process. It's not an easy process. But they did something very interesting this time. They put stories with the paintings. They just didn't hang a painting up and put it, this is Mrs. So-and-so. They put a story with it. And I think that will make it more interesting for the people.
What our work now has kind of evolved into is to parallel the problems that a community is struggling to try to understand and answer, and then use exhibitions or programs to be able to help people bridge the gap between, what they're feeling, what they want to do. So really using history as a roadmap to be able to help people to get to a better future. One of my favorites actually ends up being Edith Barry's mother. And the letter that we have going with that portrait is actually this kind of sad letter where she's writing to her husband, kind of admitting that she doesn't feel adequate in being a wife and mother. But it really kind of allows us to understand what was going through people's minds at the time. And so I really like doing research just on how emotions and experiences change or don't change over time.
It's hard to encapsulate, the museum in a few sentences because it is a dynamic place. It also strikes me that you can be in a community and not think about or not take advantage of the things that are right in your backyard. And so I think that in some ways it's a quiet gem of the community.
People see it as their collective memory store.
We're a small museum, with the heart of a big museum.
The brick store fills a huge need in the community, and I hope no one ever takes this museum for granted. What the museum gives to you as a member and what they give to the community is irreplaceable. And it really makes the feeling of home that much richer. So many communities don't have that. It has so much attached to it that if it weren't here, there would in fact then be a void.